Good evening, everybody. This is Mark Malloy with Emerging Revolutionary War. We're coming to you live tonight with two special guests who work with the National Museum of the U.S. Army, uh, not far from where I live at Fort Belvoir in Virginia. We're joined tonight by Adam Zielinski, who some of you may remember having come to us to talk about battles up in New Jersey, such as Petticoat Bridge, in the 13 crucial days of the American Revolution. But we're also joined by special guest Paul Mirando, who is the chief curator of the National Museum of the U.S. Army. And we're here tonight to talk about their new exhibit that's going to be coming out this summer to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Army. And I also want to tell everybody to have a happy Washington's birthday weekend. We are coming up on the federal observance of his birthday tomorrow. Everybody calls it President's Day, but it is federally Washington's birthday, and here in Virginia, it's George Washington Day. So we're excited to celebrate that, and that kind of dovetails perfectly into this conversation we're having tonight. So yeah, let me go ahead and I'll first turn it over to you, Paul, to introduce us to what is the National Museum of the U.S. Army.
Well, greetings. Thank you for having me. So the National Museum of the United States Army, obviously we tell the Army's story specifically through the eyes of soldiers. So visitors who come to our museum are going to see amazing exhibits, displays, artifacts that highlight the soldiers' experience, of course, providing a very sort of strong narrative of the Army's rich history.
And the museum, it's relatively a new museum, is that correct?
Right. So we opened originally in November, or I should say, November of 2020, and then we closed during COVID, and we didn't reopen until June of 21. So yeah, we've been open essentially for 4 years outside Fort Belvoir area between on Fairfax County Parkway in between Route 1 and 95. Yeah, and like you said, um, you know, um, we tell the Army story. Those who haven't been here, I encourage you to come to check out just not only sort of the artifacts we have on display, but just the educational programming we provide throughout the museum as well. There are always events and programs, history talks that are happening. So encourage you to check out our website where a lot of that information resides.
Great, yeah, no, and we can we'll drop a link into the chat for the museum's website. And no, yeah, we're really Emerging Revolutionary War. We've actually spoken at the National Museum of the U.S. Army. You all have a great exhibit. Now, when people come there normally, do you have stuff about the Revolutionary War in your exhibits?
We do. Part of our permanent gallery, we do focus on the Revolutionary War. It's more of a sort of an overview of the war in our gallery, and some really interesting artifacts on display. But it's more from a sort of a holistic perspective of the Army. And focus on this new exhibit, we really get into the details of the soldiers' experience. So I think in some ways it will complement each other when we do open in June of this year.
Great, yeah, and talking about June, I'm going to bring Adam into the discussion here now too. What makes June of this year significant?
Well, as some of you might know, this coming June is the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States Army. So it was just a great opportunity to kind of start from the very beginning, if you will. And with all of the different events planned for the next year and a half, leading up to, I'm sure, July 4th, 2026 will be the big one. But starting at the beginning with some of the other major events, obviously Lexington Concord and Bunker Hill. But a lot of people, I think, don't know, or they might know, but maybe take it for granted, if you will, that the Army in its very, very foundation was kind of a shot in the dark. Congress had to really try to pull together all these different militia groups that were, that had come together around Boston after Lexington and Concord, and they had to try to make a unified military out of these different militia groups. And once that came together in June, it was authorized, and obviously George Washington was picked to be commander in chief. But as we know, while all this was happening in Philadelphia, Battle of Bunker Hill takes place in Massachusetts. So the founding of the Army takes place right when all these other big events are happening. And then, of course, everything that follows after that, we really try to capture this in this exhibit by, as Paul alluded to, going into the enlisted soldier story and trying to really bring out those stories wherever they might exist. And we've been fortunate that we've discovered so many along the way doing research for this exhibit that it really does help show the Army's founding from the very beginning. And I think in a very new and exciting way.
Yeah, no. Now, and when it was founded, was it known as the United States Army? People usually get confused as far as the Continental Army versus, the militias that fought at Lexington and Concord. And can you just give a brief overview of kind of how this thing went from a bunch of militias shooting at Lexington and Concord to this United States Army?
Yeah, so in the beginning, you had, the provincial forces in New England. And believe it or not, George Washington was not the first commander in chief, if you will. It was actually Artemus Ward. But then once the Continental Army is officially adopted and authorized by Congress, Washington, of course, is selected to be its commander in chief. Throughout the first year of the war, it's really known as the First Establishment, if you will. And the Americans, kind of like the British, if you will, they expected the war to be very short and quick, be over by year's end. Obviously, that didn't happen. And one of the biggest obstacles facing the Continental Army was enlistments. Back then, at this point in the war, most soldiers' enlistments expired at the end of the year. So that was an ongoing problem that Washington, from the very beginning, saw that he had to kind of come up with a solution. And obviously, working within a governing body like Congress, it didn't always happen as fast as they needed to, and as events were changing in real time. So the Second Establishment in '76 comes into play, and really what changes from there is, they had to make sure that the colonies, and then obviously the states after the passage of the Declaration, were all contributing equally. And all the numbers were, everybody was sending forth the amount of troops that Washington and all the commanders needed. And that wasn't always the case, because remember, the war started in New England. So New England bore the brunt of most of the soldier enlistments from the beginning of the war. And then in the fall of '76, Congress authorizes what is known as the Third Establishment. This doesn't actually go into effect until the winter of '77, when Washington is encamped in Morristown. And pretty much the big development that comes out of this, aside from kind of creating the backbone of the Army into what we know as the 88 Battalion Resolve, is also that, as I mentioned a second ago about the enlistments, for the first time, there's a 3-year enlistment requirement. So this kind of ends the problem they had with short enlistments. And then the Fourth Establishment in January of 1781 basically consolidates the Army and shrinks it down. And that had a lot more to do with finances than it did with any kind of battle development or development in the war. Obviously, the continental currency wasn't really doing well at this time, and Congress had no money. So one way of trying to deal with not having to pay the soldiers was shrinking the Army. And then there was different tweaks to it over the next 2 years as the war wound down. And then at the end of the war, the Continental Army is essentially disbanded all together. And then in July of 1784, the First American Regiment is authorized by Congress. And this is one thing I think a lot of people might not understand. The Revolutionary War solved many things. It obviously solved the idea of American independence by giving it to us, but it didn't solve the question of standing armies. And there was still a great big question mark on what it meant to have a standing army in peacetime. So after the war, the First American Regiment was a single regiment, and it was only a few hundred soldiers. And this was essentially the birth of the United States Army as we know it today. So out of the Continental Army, which again is the founding of the United States Armed Forces and Army in that regard, the Army really comes into play in its first phase in 1784.
Yeah. So, and this is something you can trace that lineage all the way back there to June 14th, 1775. And I love on the the Army's flag today. You still have that that written on there. And I'll say, having visited the National Museum of the U.S. Army, one of my favorite things is when you walk in there and you have all the battle honors going all the way back to the Revolutionary War, and you can see kind of this heritage of the military going all the way back to that time period. So yeah, the 250th in June is going to be a big momentous occasion. And yeah, so and you all have this special exhibit that's going to be on there. So Paul, if you want to kind of tell us a little bit about how this exhibit came about and really kind of what you all are trying to get across through this exhibit, I think would be great.
Sure. So right when we opened the museum back in 2021, 2021, I started thinking about what are we going to do for the 250th commemoration. So really it goes as far back as that, is thinking about what stories we'd like to tell, what type of exhibit we want to sort of display. And we really wanted to continue sort of the mission of the museum, which is soldier focused. And as many of you may know, finding Revolutionary War artifacts that are tied directly to soldiers or who own those artifacts are very hard to come by. And in the Army's collection, while we have a nice collection of Rev War material, we were lacking a lot of artifacts that are directly tied to individual soldiers. So we sought out to seek loans from a multitude of institutions and organizations. And we were very successful at doing that. And we started soon realizing that we have a great story to tell, that we can specifically focus on why soldiers fought, what was motivating them, and while also talking about their experiences in battle, which, is hard to illustrate. But through sort of first-person accounts, diaries, quotes from soldiers during and after the war, we were able to kind of uncover something that I think is very, very important to do. We talked about the Declaration of Independence, right? We declared our independence in 1776. We still had to fight and win and secure that independence, and it's all because of these soldiers who sacrificed their lives day in and day out to secure that independence. So that was kind of what we were starting with. And this is a very, very artifact heavy exhibit. We're going to have close to 290 artifacts on display. And like I said, about almost 200 of those are actually loans from other museums, other institutions, organizations, and collectors.
Yeah, you talk about how difficult it is to, that's just something as a person who enjoys going to Revolutionary War. It's amazing how few things still have survived from that time period 250 years ago, but especially from the common soldiers, and you're right, reading and writing about this time period, I mean, just some of the sacrifices these people went through is difficult to fathom, so that when you do have some of those tangible pieces and you can actually see it that they carried with them is just makes it all the more real that these are real people and real sacrifices that they went through. That's awesome. And you say that so the focus is on the common soldier. So this might be different than other Rev War exhibits they might go to at other museums where the focus might be more on the broader kind of war. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. We are specifically focused on what soldiers are going through during the war. We're not trying to tell the entire story of the American Revolution. There are other places that do that, other museums who do that quite well. We want to tell the Army story, but we want to do it in a very comprehensive way. So we start obviously from the beginning, the founding of the Army, all the way to the end of the war, and even after the war. What was the first veterans' experience after the war? Wasn't very good. So how do we tell that story and then also tie it into the modern army of today? You know, when you think about why soldiers fight, motivation to join the army, a lot of it, of course, patriotism, but it was more than that. It was also trying to sense of adventure, get a job, a profession, get out of the small town they're in and bring honor to their family or to the town. Not much different why soldiers today join the army. So we try to make that connection towards the end of this exhibit. The fact that you still have National Guard units that are specifically linked to those original Continental regiments. They even have, the insignias still represent or reflect sort of revolutionary symbols. Um, so we make that connection as well. So it's not, so there's a way to bring in the modern army story.
Yeah, yeah, like I said, it's a thread that kind of goes through 250 years of but they can claim this common heritage of what these guys did. And I always, and Adam knows when I talk about the battles of Trenton and Princeton in particular, just how small a few men were in that army at that time. And how one historian said, maybe well be doubted whether so few men in such a short amount of time had, larger, more lasting impacts upon the history of the world. These guys and the things that they did, they really were, these ordinary people in extraordinary times who had, kind of major effects on the history of the world. So you say this exhibit is artifact heavy, and you're loaning a bunch of stuff from different collections all across the country. Can you tell us about some of the special artifacts that you all are planning on having on exhibit this summer?
Well, we want to keep a little mystery to it because we don't want to let too much out. There are some really powerful and very rare artifacts, some that have never been on display before. Obviously they're going to be artifacts directly related to General George Washington, Daniel Morgan, Lord Sterling, and others. But we don't want to go too much into detail what they are. But know that when you do see them, I know those in this audience are going to really love what they see and some of the pieces that we're getting, not only from the United States but also from overseas as well. So from National Army Museum in London to the France and Canada. So we're bringing in those stories as well, the Loyalist story. For example, then also obviously the British side and the French side. So there will be some key artifacts from them that I think is going to add so much to this exhibit.
That's great. What else? I got behind me a still from a fly through, and I'll drop in the chat too a YouTube video. You can also find it on our blog of kind of a fly through, so people can kind of get a sense of what this exhibit is actually going to look like. And can you talk a little bit about some of the other really cool features outside of just the objects themselves that people are going to be able to experience?
Yeah, I'll throw this one to Adam. Want to jump in?
Yeah. I think aside from behind you have some of the cast figures that we're going to have on display. And this really, I think, goes to the heart of what we're really trying to showcase here. Well, and Paul said it best, we're not trying to, and we certainly can't tell the entire war in this exhibit, and we're not trying to. However, we do have the space, and we're utilizing the space to tell some really unique stories that I think a lot of people might miss on the first chance they get reading about the revolution. And I think they'll walk away very surprised, and also taking in that this war impacted people from all walks of life. And forgive me, I think the big misnomer is it was a war that was fought just a bunch of white guys fighting each other. That is certainly not the case, and we certainly have those stories available in this exhibit that show that there are diverse stories here for everybody to access, and I think that's a wonderful thing, particularly with the 250th coming ahead of us. So that's one aspect that I really liked about working on this exhibit. Another is we have two three-dimensional topographical maps that are going to represent both the battles of Bunker Hill and the siege at Yorktown. And these will be accompanied with video screens giving about a 3 to 5 minute summary of the battles themselves. And I want one in my living room. I'm so blown away by how these turned out. I think the public is going to be completely wowed by them. And we also have interactive kiosks that break down the Northern and Southern Theater campaigns by battle. And within those kiosks, visitors will have access to the soldiers themselves. And we highlight individual soldier stories through these kiosks, through diaries, through pension applications. And for me, I think that is really the beating heart of this exhibit, if you will. While the artifacts themselves are speak to these soldiers and their stories, reading their accounts really just kind of brought it all back home for me. And I think visitors are going to walk out of here with a newfound sense and appreciation for what these men and women had to go through.
And if I can jump in, Adam mentioned the cast figures. I mean, these are extremely realistic cast figures, and we made a point to represent real soldiers who served during the war. So we did a lot of research on these individuals, what they wore. Most we don't know what they looked like, but we can sort of conjecture a little bit based on some historical records and things like that. But each cast figure that we spent an enormous amount of time working on to get right. In fact, Adam and I will head to New York next week in a studio where they're actually producing these things. And part of our job is figuring out, the cut of the uniform, what type of musket or bayonet should they have on their person. So even those getting into those details really brings the story alive, because if you're a visual learner, seeing, looking at these cast figures, getting a sense of what these soldiers wore will give you a sense of how they fought. And so we want to make sure, we got to get it right, and do the most research we can to make sure we're being as accurate as possible.
Yeah, no, and as he does, living history and reenactments, I can definitely attest to, that just brings it all the more to life. So I think that's, that would be really cool to see those figures, and the maps and the videos, and it sounds like a real interactive experience. I guess for the audience who you're catering to, do you have a certain audience you're looking for, something that everybody's gonna be able to enjoy? I got a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old, so I'm looking maybe to bring them up to check it out too. So what can you say about who you're hoping comes and checks out this exhibit?
Well, we want everybody to come and visit. We feel that the exhibit can appeal to all different types of audiences, all different type of learning levels. Those serious students of Revolutionary War history are going to find a lot of information. Adam said on the kiosk, we really get into the weeds on different soldier stories and different battles and things of that nature. But there are also some simple interactives, like a flip book, for example, where you can flip through and learn about certain stories. Mentioned the AV kiosk, which is a touchscreen enabled devices. So, however you interact with exhibits or however you, sort of embrace history or learn about history, I strongly feel this exhibit can appeal to all different audiences. And specifically, we've done that so we don't alienate groups who may have a different way of absorbing history. You can't just simply put a book on the wall and expect everyone's going to read everything you write. But we want it to be visually arresting as well. To the topographical maps that we're having and the interactive components of it, I think will reach new audiences.
That's great. And talking about these figures and these videos and the maps and the artifacts, what were some of the stories that people are going to hear or see when they're going through these exhibits that you find to be, I mean, because like you said, I feel like I've been to a lot of museum exhibits and the focus, is on those kinds of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, kind of what they're doing. Are there any cool stories that you came across during your research and during the creation of this exhibit that jumped out at you as like, this is a really cool story that not a lot of people know about, and this is gonna tell these people's stories? Anything you guys want to share as far as like what people can look forward to? I know you're trying to keep some of this for the actual exhibit, but maybe you can share one.
Well, I'll say this. I'll I will save individual stories for the exhibit because I think there are quite a few that are so individualist in themselves that they bear discovering for the first time. But one thing that I discovered in doing a lot of the research, and I probably read 2,000 pension applications for this exhibit, and however many diaries and journals. The camaraderie between the soldiers really does come across, and I know a lot of us, myself included, have read numerous accounts, whether it's Washington, throwing his hands up about the militia being unreliable, about desertions and all that. All of that obviously was a factor in the war too. But when you read a lot of these different accounts from these soldiers, and many of them we were fortunate to highlight and feature in this exhibit, they really do come across as patriotic in their own ways, but also just taking pride in having shared an experience with the person next to them. And I think that alone translates through the centuries to people in the fighting right now overseas in the modern armed services. So that alone, to something Paul said, it translates. It's there, and I think it's very accessible for all audiences, but particularly for people who have served in the military. And you can access these people, even though this is 250 years ago. So.
Yeah, no, I that is something, and I feel like it's a common thread through military history in general. That you kind of see this common theme of patriotism and all these kinds of things kind of get things started, and then but once wars begin, it is that brotherhood of fighting men that kind of keeps people in the field and kind of sustains them throughout it. Because writing about Trenton and Princeton and reading about guys who have no shoes walking through the snow, that question constantly came up. Motivation. What is driving these guys to do this? It's unbelievable, in our modern life to think that you would go through that kind of thing. But you see it today with the military today and some of the situations they find themselves in. It's what's motivating them when they're on the field and when they're in campaign and stuff like that. It's those people they're fighting with. So I think that's something that I've also seen through much of my research, and I'm glad that this exhibit is going to kind of bring that brotherhood, that common soldier, what they're going through to the forefront. We've been getting some good comments from folks. If anybody has any questions or anything, they can throw them in the chat too. Karen Mathis says it'll be phenomenal to see. Melissa Espinoza says she's certainly going to promote this to her students and their families. Thomas Thompson says he's going to stop by in August to definitely check it out. So A lot of people are excited for this exhibit. I'll say, you know, and Adam, you mentioned reading through thousands of pension applications. What would either of you, the biggest challenges in doing this kind of exhibit that you've run into? I know, you know, compared to other conflicts like the American Civil War or World War I or World War II, where there's like kind of a plethora of information about common soldiers. For Revolutionary War soldiers, it can be very difficult to kind of fill in the gaps. I know that's one thing. You know, is that something, you know, you found the pension applications to obviously be an important way to tap into that? Were there other challenges in this kind of creating this exhibit?
Yes. Well, the one thing about the pension applications is you always have to be careful of, because a soldier with a too good of a story, too good to be true, rather, is probably too good to be true. And a lot of these guys, you know, they were in their 70s and 80s when they were given their depositions to receive, you know, their pension, you know, the pension claims. And sometimes they were, you know, some of the stories and some of the things they were saying just don't add up, you know. So you have to kind of take everything with a grain of salt. But then you get one person whose, you know, revelation is very lucid, and he's explaining an experience that is one of a kind, and it kind of just makes you, you know, regain trust and regain trust in the process all over again. You're like, wow, I can't believe I just found this, you know, and then that. But I think one of the biggest challenges, and Paul hit on it when he was discussing all the research and just all the work we've had to go through getting the cast figures accurate. Remember, you know, there's no photographs back then, and everything is done. You know, most of the contemporary artwork they're paintings. So we're basing what we know on these people on the best interpretations of the painters of the age. And even the written testimonies and documentation we have for what they wore, you know, what they were doing day to day, we kind of have to take a leap of faith in many instances, and that's kind of an uncomfortable place to be in, someone in our profession, because you want to get it right. You want to be as accurate as possible for the public, because the public is putting their faith and their trust in us to get it right to what we're presenting them. So I know that day in and day out, whether it's, you know, doing a pension application, whether it's researching an artifact, whether it's you know, a strand of hair for a cast figure, there's no stone left unturned where we're really trying to get as right as possible. And that has been a very rewarding experience for me personally as a historian, but just you know, being somebody who's very invested in this time period, I've learned so much, and I've gotten so much better at understanding the time period. And I think that, you know, that's a win-win for everybody. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, and yeah, like I said, I mean, this time period can be difficult, like I said, because of the lack of, and as we mentioned earlier too, the lack of material culture that still exists. You know, so much of
right. Remember, nothing was mass produced back then. You know, everything was, you know, kind of individually made. You know, even with the Ladies Association, when they were making uniforms for the soldiers in 1780 and whatnot, it wasn't like the Civil War, where you can still find originally boxed, you know, blue or Confederate gray uniforms occasionally come up, you know, like that have never, you know, that wasn't the case back then. So the material culture, all of the stuff that we, you know, rely on, it's extremely rare to locate, and even rarer to, you know, have an accurate description in some regards. So again, it requires a lot of time and a lot of research, but that's what we're here for. So
got the right people on the job there. So.
I hope so.
No, I think it's really exciting. You know, I think this is, like I said, you know, focusing on, you know, those common soldiers and being able to do that research to find ways to fill those gaps is really important. But I think by doing things like this kind of interactive aspects of the exhibit, by taking those things that we do have still around, putting them on display, being able to see the actual things they carried, it brings it to life, and I think it makes it more real for people who, because that's something that I also find, with the American Civil War, you have those photographs, you have that kind of closer connection, and even the photographs. I mean, the clothes they're wearing during the Civil War are much more similar to what we're wearing. I mean, the wearing the breeches and the wigs and the cocked hats. I mean, it's a little bit further from people's ability to grasp, but what they lived through is very human. It's exactly what the sacrifice and everything else they did is something that's universal and that people could still understand. So I think this is going to be a great way to tell that story. So people who want it, you guys are so tell me about what you're planning, when you all are planning on opening this exhibit. Do you all have any events or programs associated with it, and how long is this exhibit people going to be able to view it? So
Yeah, so we plan to open to the public on June 6th, and that opening weekend, we're going to have a wide variety of activities, from reenactors, living historians, educational programs for kids. So yeah, plan for that weekend. I recommend Saturday probably have the most activities, but once we get everything up on the website, you can see what we're doing. So the plan is to be open for 2 full years. From June of 25 essentially to June of 27. So you have time to see. If you can't get there, this year, certainly going to, honor and celebrate, the founding of this country next year as well. And that's why we wanted to start in 2025. We wanted to highlight the Army story first, because it leads into, obviously, the time period of the Declaration of Independence. So yes, June 6th, open to the public, wide variety of activities that weekend. And we'll continue to kind of do all sorts of commemorative events over those 2 years with special programs, special events, whether on 4th of July, Veterans Day. We have a whole big plan ready to go.
No, that sounds really great, and you're right. I feel like as historians who are really excited about the 250th anniversary, there is so much focus on July 4th, 2026, that you don't really understand how important 1775 and all the events that led up to, and the actual conflict that then goes on for 8 long years. You realize that how important all of those events were. So I think it's really important, and I think this exhibit will kind of highlight the importance of that military action, because without it, July 4th, 1776 doesn't mean anything. It's just words on a paper without the actual victory during this war. Okay, great. And if people want to plan their visit, like I said, we'll toss the website in there. You can go visit National Museum of the U.S. Army, check out their website, go visit the exhibit, which opens June 6th. You have 2 years to go check it out. Do you all have any final kind of things you want to talk about with regard to the exhibit?
Just spread the word. We wanted many people to know about this exhibit. So friends, colleagues, families, just on Facebook or any other social media, just pass it along. We want to be able to reach as many people we can, because we feel this is an important story that I think we forget about. And so the more people we can get to this exhibit, the more people we can get visitors to not only engage with the exhibit, but also engage with the educational programming that's surrounding this exhibit over the course of these 2 years. I think it's extremely important. And so whatever folks online can do to spread the word about this exhibit. Mark, you're doing a great job in getting this out on social media, pushing that video out and things like that. We just do more of that. That I would really be appreciative.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be definitely worthwhile, like I said, for everybody to check out. And we at Emerging Revolutionary War are hopefully going to be able to get up there, maybe do some videos from the actual exhibit, some behind the scenes stuff. So I encourage everybody kind of keep your ear to the ground and tuned in on that. But unless anybody has anything else to say, thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you, Adam and Paul. And we're really looking forward to it. I'm excited. I think this will be a great exhibit to remember. Yeah, a length of history going all the way back from the Revolutionary War all the way up to today, as far as how important our military and all those who are willing to sacrifice and serve to defend our liberty and freedom. But thank you all very much, and we will be back in a couple weeks. Thank you all. We'll talk to you soon.